um, let's talk about training the frontal plane, and I'm glad I have you in here for me to fill in the holes of what I'm talking about. But basically, what I mean by that is the body is three-dimensional, and we
Mhm.
split it up into three planes. I'm just going to show people really quickly. So you've got the sagittal plane, which is at your side. So basically, if you think of me moving in this motion, which is, I would say, a good 80 to 90% of the exercises we do, whether it's a deadlift, a squat, bench press, all of it's being done in that plane. Then you've got your frontal plane, which is right here out in front, and then transverse plane, which we're not going to talk about right now. But the point of this is to train your body in three dimensions, because you don't just live life in one dimension, the sagittal plane. I realize that walking, running, a lot of the stuff that we do with a little bit more power is sagittal. It's just in that one plane. But then explain to me any kind of sport where people are running back and forth, side to side, all around the place. Point is, you're going to have to move in three dimensions, which I think everybody realizes, but it isn't always put into practice. So talk to me a little bit about how you tend to try to mix in those frontal plane movements while you're treating some, or while you're training somebody.
All right. With exercise, I'm a big fan of letting people earn things, right? So they kind of, not to be like too egotistical about it, but they got to prove to me that we could do these activities in these different planes. And the frontal plane being the second one after the sagittal plane that we'll start to enter, and then the transverse being the last. Because that's kind of where a lot of things can go wrong for a lot of people. But you got to kind of earn bilateral, meaning side by side stance. Both feet are, like you just said, it's like a squat or a deadlift or anything like that. We got to get strong there first. We got to be able to brace the core there first before we start working in these other planes. And earning the right to do so through proper patterning of movement and then strengthening those movements over time is really the safest way for anybody across the board, but definitely anybody over the age of 30, 35, definitely over 40. I just don't think there's any other way to do it, because we just don't know. Like you sat down at a desk for, if you're in your 40s and you right out of college, you took an office job. Well, there's some things we got to turn on again. We got to make sure some things are doing their job again. Like we touched on with the core. So really that plane, obviously, we're talking about abduction and adduction, right, with the frontal plane, correct? So
To myself, yes.
yeah. So once we get confidence in the sagittal plane, like we talked about before, that's extension and flexion, that's bicep curls. I mean, basically every traditional kind of weightlifting thing that you're going to do, especially with heavy weights. And there's an argument that should be one of the only planes that you do lift super heavy in, because you have the most potential for muscle there. And like I said, you're locking things down. There's not a lot of asymmetry in your body. There shouldn't be, with those movements. But then, when we talk about moving in another sort of plane, it really challenges the core in a different way. And it would be the next step that I take after training in the sagittal plane, because now we've learned competency, meaning that we know how to brace the core when we're in a bilateral stance in that sagittal plane. The next step would be to do a front to back asymmetrical in the sagittal plane. That And then once we can get confident there, once I don't see those hips wiggling around a whole bunch, once I see that core engaging reflexively, meaning that when you go to move, it just happens. A lot of times you'll get people in a posture or position where their core just looks like it's trying to figure it out. Like it just cannot find stability. And that person, I wouldn't want to train them outside of those sort of positions. They would be in the lower level postures. We'll take this even further, going into FMS, which we both really like with Gray Cook,
Sure.
and doing progressive posture. So if I've got somebody in a sagittal, standing sagittal position, and they don't have competency there, I'm going to take their posture down to either a kneeling, half kneeling, even quadruped. We'll start on the floor, hands on the floor, knees on the floor. Can we get things braced? Because we can't brace And that's sort of the idea there, is that
Say that last part again. I'm really hoping that I'm the one cutting out here, but you skipped. I think you froze out, and I want people to hear what you just said.
oh, if you cannot brace or you cannot maintain proper joint angles or proper positioning in like a quadruped position, like on all fours, then you should not do that movement standing. So if I'm having you do a row down on all fours and you're just rowing with one arm, now you've got three things touching the ground, and I still see that you can't really maintain that core strength. Well, then we got work to do there, because as we progress through those standing positions from a quadruped to a kneeling to a half kneeling and then to a standing position, the idea is that if I cannot brace down at those lower level postures, meaning when you're on the ground, that I shouldn't, or I probably won't be able to brace when I'm standing, or that there's something going on there. Now I've added more to the equation, and I'm probably in an even more compromised position in the standing position.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just, I have to take that a step further with my people and basically break you down as though you were a baby. Like I'll put you on your back, on your stomach, make you roll around literally, get you up
Good
in
stuff.
all fours. You rehab a lot like you originally learned how to move, because something that I say to people all the time is that I'm not training your muscles, I'm training your movements. Your muscles will get trained while we're training up your movements, and life is just going to take care of that for me. If you want to go to a gym afterwards, that's fine, but we got to put these in place first. And with that frontal plane in mind, you think of things like carries and things that you just mentioned, where it's all well and good. And I try to stabilize people first and foremost in the sagittal plane, like trying to get them in some kind of bilateral stance. You guys can't see my feet, but basically in like a hips width apart position. And then we do move to some asymmetrical, which would be like a lunge or something like that. And then come up to a single leg stance when you've earned it, but like you were talking about, I've got to make sure that, hey, can you also do that deadlift correctly while you're holding a kettlebell in one hand, or while you're holding a weight, holding a band? Something is happening on one side and not the other side that's not throwing your body off position. One of the things that I know you and I see a lot of, it's like a single arm swing. And by the way, just for anybody watching, I'm not suggesting you go out and do any of these exercises we're talking about without first somebody like looking at you and making sure that you can do them appropriately. But the single arm swing is something that's really effective actually for rotational athletes. And I've treated a lot of baseball players and combat athletes especially, who add a little bit of extra pop at the end of their rotation, even though they're not rotating at all, because now they have control of that frontal plane motion. Now they have control of the ability to do that. So that's something that's been really, really important, even from a rehab perspective. But like I said, I have to break it down to the even more nitty gritty, which sounds even less fun, but it is so important. If you're going to go out and walk, you're going to walk in a three-dimensional world. So we got to make sure that you can do that appropriately, because my goal is always to never have to see you again when we get done with your plan of care, which I realize isn't the standard, but I truly want you to be able to go out and get yourself better, and then make sure that you can at the very least troubleshoot through things, or if you do develop another problem, it's not nearly as bad and it's easy to take care of when something goes on. So, that is a huge part of it. I rarely ever teach my patients about it, because who cares, right? But it is important for you to start realizing if you're working out at home. It really is. I know a lot of this may seem boring, but it's an important aspect that your trainers, your therapists, your chiropractor, whoever, have been adding in, probably without telling you, unless they're me and you just can't shut me up anyways.
Yeah, I'll touch on one more thing. Going into the original strength system, I use a lot of that, and that uses a lot of developmental kinesiology, like you touched on. And so you're basically, it's a hard sell. I'll tell you that. Like, it's not a day one exercise for more people. It should be a day one exercise, but as a buy-in aspect, you tell somebody for the first time, hey, I want you to crawl around on the ground like a baby.
Mm-hmm.
They're probably standing up and walking out of your gym and thinking that you're crazy. So I wish for most people it was a day one exercise, but it's a hard sell. I'll just be completely honest with you.
Nobody wants to stabilize. Nobody wants to balance. Nobody wants to do mobility. And those are probably three of the more important things you can be doing before you go start slinging weights around.
Absolutely. But, it's amazing once I've got somebody bought in, and once they trust me, when I get them to try to just roll over just using their arm, and they're like, "What? What do you mean I can't roll over?" You know, I mean, it's amazing that and this all goes back to the core reflexivity. I mean, our cores have turned off. We have sat down and our cores have turned off.
Yeah.
That's what's happened for a mass majority of the United States. Their posterior chain is off, their glutes are off, their core is stretched out and weak, and the muscles that aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. It's pretty much across the board for a lot of people. But like we were talking about with the lower level postures, getting somebody to roll, getting somebody to crawl, they're pretty much, you know, to steal one from Pavel, it's the what the hell effect.
Yeah.
You know, like I just crawled across the ground and my core is burning like I've never felt it. Or, you know, I get somebody to crawl and then stand up and do an exercise and they're like, they feel their core for the first time. They're like, what was that?
Absolutely.